The autumn wind whispered through the towering pines of the Cascade Mountains as Thomas Reed checked the straps on his forest ranger pack. 20 years of patrolling these woods had taught him to trust his instincts, and something felt different about this crisp October morning. The usual sounds of wildlife had gone quiet, replaced by an eerie stillness that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He'd been tracking unusual electromagnetic disturbances for the past week, compass needles spinning wildly, radio equipment failing, and strange lights in the sky that the local astronomy club couldn't explain. The Forest Service had written it off as solar flare activity, but Thomas knew better. He'd grown up in these mountains, knew every trail and hollow like the lines on his weathered hands. The first indication that this wasn't a normal patrol came when his radio crackled to life with an ear-piercing shriek. Thomas yanked the device from his belt, but before he could switch it off, a blinding flash lit up the forest canopy. The ground trembled beneath his boots as something massive passed overhead, the sound barrier cracking like thunder. "What in the world?" he muttered, squinting through the trees. A trail of disturbed branches and scattered leaves led deeper into the forest. Whatever had come down was big, and it was close. Following the path of destruction, Thomas came upon a sight that stopped him in his tracks. A woman lay unconscious beside a fallen tree, but she was unlike any human he'd ever seen. Her skin had an opalescent sheen that shifted colors in the dappled sunlight, and what he'd initially thought was silver hair seemed to flow like liquid metal. She wore some kind of armor that pulsed with faint bioluminescent patterns. Thomas approached cautiously, his trained eye noting signs of injury, a deep gash along her side that leaked a phosphorescent fluid, and scorch marks on her armor suggesting she'd been in some kind of fight. His first aid training kicked in as he checked her vital signs, finding them stable but unusual. Her skin was cool to the touch, and her heartbeat had a strange triple rhythm. "Ma'am? Can you hear me?" he called softly, keeping his distance in case she reacted defensively upon waking. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that swirled with colors like the aurora borealis. She sat up with impossible grace despite her injuries, fixing him with an analyzing gaze. "Your designation?" she asked, her voice carrying harmonics that made Thomas's chest resonate. "Thomas Reed, Forest Ranger," he replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "You're hurt. I can help." She glanced at her wounds as if noticing them for the first time. "Your assistance is appreciated, Thomas Reed. I am Nyara, though that name holds little meaning in your language." As Thomas dressed her wounds with supplies from his first aid kit, Nyara explained that she was a scout, though she remained vague about what she was scouting for. She spoke with careful precision, choosing each word deliberately, but there was an underlying tension in her manner that suggested she was used to command rather than accepting help. "There are others pursuing me," she said finally, watching as Thomas secured the last bandage. "You should leave. This conflict is not yours." Thomas straightened up, crossing his arms. "This is my forest. If there's trouble coming, it became my conflict the moment you landed here." He offered her a hand up, noting how she assessed the gesture before accepting it. "Besides, you're in no condition to move far, and night's coming. I have a ranger station about 2 miles from here. We can figure out our next move there." Nyara's expression shifted subtly, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "You would shelter me, knowing nothing of my purpose or origin?" "Ma'am, I've spent my life protecting this forest and anyone who needs help in it. Right now, that includes you." He shouldered his pack, grinning slightly. "Besides, I figure anyone who can survive a crash landing like that and still be this composed is probably someone worth knowing." As they made their way through the darkening forest, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was bigger than just finding an injured stranger. The way Nyara moved, even injured, she had a warrior's awareness of her surroundings, and the sophisticated technology integrated into her armor suggested she was far more than a simple scout. What he didn't know was that this quiet evening would mark the beginning of an adventure that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his world, his capabilities, and the true nature of courage. As the first stars began to appear through the canopy above, neither of them noticed the faint shimmer of a cloaked ship passing silently overhead, its sensors locked onto their position. The forest held its secrets close that night, as it had for countless centuries before. But for the first time in human history, those secrets included a legendary warrior from the stars, and a forest ranger who was about to discover that his simple life of protecting the wilderness had prepared him for something far greater than he could have imagined. The ranger station stood silhouetted against the deepening twilight, its weathered wooden walls a testament to decades of mountain storms. Thomas led Nyara inside, flicking on the solar-powered lights that cast a warm glow through the simple one-room structure. Maps covered one wall, while survival gear and communications equipment filled the shelves along another. Nyara's luminescent eyes scanned the interior, pausing on the radio equipment. Without warning, she raised her hand, and a pulse of energy emanated from her armor. Every electronic device in the station went dark. "Hey!" Thomas protested, reaching for the backup generator switch. "Necessary precaution," Nyara stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Your technology can be traced. We are being hunted by beings far more dangerous than you can imagine." As if to emphasize her point, a low vibration rumbled through the ground, causing the windows to rattle. Thomas moved to peer outside, but Nyara pulled him away from the window with surprising strength. "The Kurvok," she whispered, her voice tight with controlled tension. "They're earlier than I anticipated." She touched a panel on her armor, and holographic symbols appeared in the air before her. 3 scout ships, heavily armed. "They're searching for my energy signature." Thomas absorbed this information with remarkable calm, years of handling forest emergencies having taught him to think clearly under pressure. "Okay, so we need to stay hidden. But first, you're going to tell me exactly what's going on. Who are you really?" Nyara's expression shifted, the bioluminescent patterns on her armor pulsing faster. "I am the last sentinel of the Astari people. We're peacekeepers of this sector of the galaxy. The Kurvok destroyed my homeworld 3 cycles ago. I've been tracking their invasion fleet ever since." "And they followed you to Earth," Thomas concluded, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "Not exactly," Nyara corrected, her eyes dimming slightly. "I led them here deliberately. Your planet is unique, positioned at a crucial navigational point in space. If the Kurvok claim it, they can launch attacks across 17 systems. I came to prevent that." A flash of light outside illuminated the room briefly, followed by the sound of trees cracking. The Kurvok ships were getting closer. Thomas moved to his equipment locker, pulling out topographical maps of the area. "There's an old mine system about 3 miles north," he said, spreading the maps on the table. "The rocks contain high concentrations of magnetite. Would that help mask your energy signature?" Nyara studied the maps intently, her fingers tracing the contour lines. Yes, that could work. But we need to." She suddenly stiffened, her head snapping toward the door. "Down!" She tackled Thomas to the floor as a beam of intense energy sliced through the station's wall, cutting a glowing path where they had been standing moments before. The air filled with the scent of burning wood and ozone. "Run!" Nyara commanded, pulling Thomas to his feet. They burst through the back door into the darkness of the forest. Behind them, the station erupted in flames as more energy beams cut through the night. Thomas led the way through the undergrowth, his intimate knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable as they navigated by starlight. The sound of pursuit followed them, inhuman screeching and the whine of advanced technology cutting through the natural sounds of the forest. "They're hurting us," Nyara said between breaths as they ran. "Standard Kurvok hunting pattern. We need to." She stumbled, her earlier injuries taking their toll. Thomas caught her before she fell, supporting her weight. "I know these woods better than anyone," he assured her. "There's another way to the mines." He guided them down a nearly invisible game trail, one that wound through a series of steep ravines. The sounds of pursuit grew more distant as they descended deeper into the wilderness. Finally, they reached a small cave entrance, almost completely hidden by vegetation. "This connects to the old mine system," Thomas explained, pulling aside the branches. "I mapped these tunnels years ago. Some of them go deep into the mountain." As they entered the cave, Nyara's armor began to pulse with a soft light, illuminating their way. She paused, placing her hand against the rock wall. "The mineral content, it's perfect. Their scanners will have difficulty penetrating this deep." They made their way through the twisting passages until they reached a larger chamber. Ancient mining equipment cast strange shadows in the light from Nyara's armor. Finally able to rest, Thomas slid down against a wall, his breath coming in heavy gasps. "So," he said after catching his breath, "a legendary peacekeeper, huh? That's a bit more impressive than a scout." Nyara knelt beside him, her expression softening slightly. "You handled yourself well back there. Most humans would have panicked. Most humans haven't spent 20 years dealing with wildfires, flash floods, and the occasional angry bear," Thomas replied with a tired smile. "Though I admit, alien invasions weren't covered in my ranger training." The humor faded from his face as he looked at her seriously. "But now what? We can't hide in here forever, and I'm guessing those Kurvok aren't going to give up and go home." Nyara's eyes took on a determined gleam. "No, they won't. Which is why I need to teach you to fight them. Your knowledge of this terrain combined with my combat techniques, we might stand a chance." She stood, offering him her hand. "Are you willing to learn, Thomas Reed? What I must teach you will change you forever. The powers of my people were not meant for humans, but we have no choice." Thomas looked at her outstretched hand, understanding that this moment would define the rest of his life. Above them, the mountain trembled as Kurvok ships continued their search, a reminder of what was at stake. He took her hand and rose to his feet. "Teach me everything." Deep in the mine's central chamber, Nyara's armor cast shifting patterns of light across the rough-hewn walls. 3 days had passed since their escape through the forest, and the constant rumble of Kurvok ships searching overhead had become a grim backdrop to their training sessions. "Focus," Nyara commanded, her voice echoing in the cavern. "The energy flows through all living things. Your people call it by many names, but its nature remains constant." She stood behind Thomas, who sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, his eyes closed in concentration. Thomas took a deep breath, trying to sense what she described. After 20 years of reading the forest's subtle signs, he thought he understood connection to nature, but this was different. This was like trying to catch starlight with his bare hands. "I don't think this is working," he muttered, frustration evident in his voice. "Maybe humans just aren't capable of." He stopped mid-sentence as a tingling sensation spread through his body, starting from where Nyara's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. "There," she said softly. "That sensation, that's what we're looking for. Your connection to the forest is stronger than you realize. You've been touching this energy your whole life without knowing it. How else could you read weather patterns in the way birds fly? Or sense approaching storms before your instruments detect them?" Thomas opened his eyes, turning to look at her. "That's just experience. Rangers learn to read signs." "Signs that most of your kind overlook," Nyara interrupted. "Your sensitivity to the natural world is what drew me to trust you in the first place. Now, we must amplify that connection." She moved to stand before him, her armor shifting to reveal a small crystalline device. "This is a focusing crystal, used to train young Astari warriors. It will help bridge the gap between your natural abilities and our techniques." As she spoke, the crystal began to glow with an inner light. Thomas felt the tingling sensation intensify, spreading through his entire body. The very air seemed to shimmer around them. "Incredible," he breathed, watching as small stones near his feet began to vibrate in response to the energy flowing through him. "This is how your people fight?" "It's how we survived," Nyara corrected, her expression momentarily distant. "The Kervok's technology is formidable, but they don't understand the deeper connections between energy and matter. They never learned to listen to the worlds they conquered." A distant explosion shook dust from the ceiling, reminding them of the danger above. Nyara's expression hardened. "Now, again. This time, reach out with your senses. Feel the mountain around us. The roots of trees breaking through stone. The underground streams carving new paths through darkness." Hours passed as Thomas learned to extend his awareness beyond normal human limits. He began to sense the complex web of life threading through the mountain, colonies of bats roosting in distant chambers, groundwater flowing through hidden cracks, even the subtle vibrations of tectonic plates far below. But with this expanded awareness came new concerns. "The Kervok," he said during a brief rest. "They're changing their search pattern. Moving closer to the populated areas." Nyara nodded grimly. "They grow impatient. Soon they will begin targeting human settlements, hoping to draw me out." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. The crystal isn't just a training tool, it's part of a larger weapon system. One that could drive the Kervok from this sector permanently." Thomas wiped sweat from his brow, studying her expression. "Why do I feel there's a catch?" "Because you're learning to read energy patterns well," she replied with a hint of pride. "The weapon requires two operators, working in perfect synchronization. It was designed for a starry physiology. Using it could kill a human." "But you're training me anyway," Thomas stated, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Yes." Nyara's voice was heavy with regret. "Because if we don't stop them here, Earth will be just another conquered world in their empire. And your people, your beautiful, resilient people, who have learned to read the language of nature without even realizing it, they deserve better than that." Thomas stood, stretching muscles sore from hours of training. "Then we better make sure I survive using this weapon of yours. I've got retirement plans that don't involve dying to save the world." His attempt at humor brought a rare smile to Nyara's face, but it faded quickly as another explosion echoed through the caves, closer this time. "We're running out of time," she said, retrieving more crystals from compartments in her armor. "These next techniques, they're normally taught over years, not days. Are you ready?" Thomas thought of his forest, of the town in the valley below, of all the people going about their lives unaware of the threat hovering above them. He thought of Nyara, the last of her kind, fighting to prevent his world from sharing her people's fate. "Ready," he said, taking a stance before her. "Teach me everything you've got." The crystals began to glow brighter as Nyara initiated the next phase of training, their light reflecting off the cave walls like captured stars. Above them, the Kervok continued their search, unaware that deep beneath the mountain, hope for Earth's survival was growing stronger with each passing hour. A week had passed since Thomas began his training, though time felt different in the depths of the mountain. His body ached from exertion, but his mind had never been clearer. The energy Nyara taught him to harness now flowed through him like a constant current, making him acutely aware of every vibration in the earth around them. "They're moving," Thomas said, his eyes closed as he traced the patterns of disturbance above. 3 carrier ships just entered the valley. They're heading toward town. His connection to the forest let him feel the trees trembling as massive ships passed overhead, their energy signatures leaving ripples in the natural flow of life. Nyara's armor pulsed with increasing intensity as she monitored her own readings. The Kervok are done searching. They're beginning their standard invasion protocol. They'll target population centers first, trying to create panic. Thomas opened his eyes, determination etched on his face. "Then it's time. Ready or not, we have to move. Remember," Nyara said as she began assembling the crystalline components of their weapon, once we activate the resonance field, we'll have only one chance. The energy required will drain both the crystals and my armor's power core. If we fail. We won't, Thomas interrupted, his voice firm. I didn't spend a week learning to bend energy fields just to fail now. He paused, looking at her intently. Besides, I've got something the Astari warriors never had. And what's that? 20 years of reading this land's rhythms. The mountain isn't just going to help us, it's going to fight with us. They emerged from the mine into a world transformed by alien presence. The morning sky was filled with dark shapes, Kurvok ships of various sizes patrolling in formation. The air crackled with energy as their sensors swept the landscape. Thomas led them through hidden paths, using his enhanced senses to avoid detection. They needed to reach higher ground, a specific peak he'd chosen for its unique geological properties. The crystal formation there would amplify their weapons' effect throughout the valley. As they climbed, the first attacks began. Beams of energy lanced down from the ships, targeting the town's power infrastructure. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, and Thomas could feel the panic rippling through the community. They're trying to draw us out, Nyara said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Making themselves an obvious target. Then let's not disappoint them. Thomas reached the summit first, helping Nyara up the final stretch. They could see the entire valley from here, and the destruction beginning to unfold below. Nyara quickly began setting up their weapon, crystals arranging themselves in a complex geometric pattern. Thomas knelt beside her, placing his hands on the focusing nodes as she'd taught him. The energy began to build immediately, making the air shimmer around them. That's when the first Kurvok ground forces appeared. They materialized from cloaked drop pods, tall, armored figures with multiple limbs wielding advanced energy weapons. Their faceted eyes gleamed with alien intelligence as they surveyed their surroundings. Keep focusing, Nyara commanded, rising to face the threat. The resonance field needs 3 minutes to achieve critical alignment. I'll hold them off. She moved like liquid lightning, her armor's energy field expanding into a defensive screen. The first wave of Kurvok troops opened fire, their weapons releasing streams of plasma that Nyara deflected with practiced skill. Thomas maintained his concentration on the crystals, but he wasn't idle. Using his newfound abilities, he reached deep into the mountain beneath them. The ground began to shift subtly, making the Kurvok soldiers lose their footing at crucial moments. Rock seemed to spring from nowhere, interrupting their shots. The battle intensified as more drop pods landed. Nyara was a blur of motion, her centuries of combat experience evident in every movement. But even she couldn't hold them all back. A plasma bolt grazed her shoulder, making her stumble. 30 seconds. Thomas called out, feeling the weapon's energy reaching critical levels. The crystals were vibrating now, emitting a high-pitched tone that made the Kurvok troops recoil in pain. Thomas. Nyara's warning came just as a Kurvok warrior broke through her defense, charging toward him with a blade of crystallized plasma. Without breaking his connection to the weapon, Thomas reached out with his free hand. The training crystals had taught him to manipulate energy, but his connection to the mountain gave him something more. The very rock beneath the Kurvok warrior erupted, wrapping around its legs like liquid stone before hardening instantly. More warriors were approaching, but the weapon was almost ready. Thomas could feel it building to a crescendo, the energy threatening to overwhelm his human nervous system. His vision began to blur, blood trickling from his nose. Now! Nyara shouted, diving toward him as the weapon reached full power. She pressed her hands over his on the focusing crystals, their energies merging into a single force. The world seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Then everything exploded in light. The resonance wave expanded outward like a ripple in reality itself. Where it touched Kurvok technology, systems failed catastrophically. Ships plummeted from the sky, their anti-gravity systems negated by the wave. Ground troops collapsed as their armor imploded. But the wave wasn't finished. It continued to build, feeding off the natural energy of the mountain itself, growing stronger as it spread through the valley. Thomas felt his consciousness expanding with it, touching every tree, every rock, every living thing in its path. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Nyara's face, her expression a mixture of triumph and concern. Then the light consumed everything, and the real battle for Earth's survival began. Consciousness returned to Thomas slowly, like dawn creeping over mountain peaks. The first thing he noticed was that he could still feel the energy flowing through him, but it was different now, deeper, more integrated with his being. The second thing he noticed was that he wasn't dead, which came as a pleasant surprise. "Welcome back," Nyara's voice came from somewhere nearby. "You've been unconscious for 2 days." Thomas opened his eyes to find himself in a makeshift shelter near the summit. Through the opening, he could see the valley below, where the wreckage of Kervok ships lay scattered like fallen leaves after a storm. The air was clearer now, free from the oppressive presence of alien technology. "Did we win?" His voice was rough, his throat dry. "Not yet." Nyara helped him sit up, and he noticed her armor was damaged, its usual shimmer dulled. The resonance wave disabled their primary fleet, but the Kervok are nothing if not adaptable. Their surviving forces have regrouped, and they're bringing reinforcements. Thomas absorbed this information, testing his limbs. Despite the exhaustion, he felt stronger somehow. The energy techniques Nyara had taught him now seemed to come naturally, as if the resonance wave had permanently altered his connection to the natural world. "You're different," Nyara observed, studying him with those ethereal eyes. "The weapon changed you." No human should have survived channeling that much energy, let alone emerged stronger. "Maybe it's because I had help," Thomas replied, remembering how the mountain itself had seemed to join their fight. "The land here, it's ancient. Powerful. It recognized what we were fighting for." A distant rumbling interrupted their conversation. New ships were appearing in the upper atmosphere, their designs more aggressive than the previous fleet. The Kervok were done playing games. "They're angry," Nyara said, her expression grim. "We destroyed their most advanced ships, made them look vulnerable. They'll throw everything they have at us now." Thomas stood, walking to the shelter's entrance. He could feel the approaching ships through his enhanced senses, but he could feel something else too, a response from the earth itself, like a sleeping giant slowly awakening. "Then let's give them a proper welcome." He turned to Nyara. "The weapon's destroyed, but we don't need it anymore. You taught me to channel energy, but I think I finally understand what that really means. This isn't just about fighting with power, it's about connecting with it." Nyara's eyes widened as she sensed what he was suggesting. "You want to link directly with the mountain's energy field? The feedback alone could kill you. Not if we work together." Thomas held out his hand. "Your people were guardians of the galaxy, right? Well, my people have been guardians too, of this land, these forests, this world. Different scales, same principle." The incoming ships were close enough now that their engine vibrations made the ground tremble. Time was running out. Nyara looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. Something shifted in her expression, respect, understanding, and perhaps something more. She took his hand, and immediately their energies began to merge. Thomas reached out with his consciousness, not just to the mountain this time, but to the entire valley. Every tree, every stream, every grain of sand became an extension of their combined will. The very bedrock thrummed with power that had laid dormant for millions of years. The Kervok ships entered the atmosphere, their weapons charging. But the earth was ready. The ground beneath their landed forces shifted and buckled, swallowing entire squadrons. The trees themselves seemed to move, their ancient roots bursting from the soil to entangle and crush alien machinery. Thomas and Nyara moved as one, directing the natural forces around them with precision born of both her ancient training in his lifetime of reading the land. When the Kervok launched their energy weapons, the very air seemed to condense, forming shields of supercharged particles that absorbed and redirected their attacks. The battle raged for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Kervok, for all their advanced technology, couldn't comprehend what they were fighting against. This wasn't just two warriors, it was an entire world rising to defend itself, guided by the combined knowledge of two guardians from very different traditions. Finally, as the sun began to set, the remaining Kervok ships retreated. Their exodus was visible as a stream of bright points ascending into the darkening sky, leaving Earth's atmosphere far faster than they had entered it. Thomas and Nyara stood on the mountaintop, their energies still intertwined, watching their enemies flee. The connection between them had grown into something neither fully understood, a bridge between two worlds, two traditions of guardianship. "They'll tell others about this," Nyara said finally. "About how Earth defended itself. About what happened when they tried to conquer this world." "Let them," Thomas replied, surveying the valley below. Already he could feel the land beginning to heal itself, the natural order restoring balance. "We'll be ready if they come back." Nyara turned to him, her expression curious. "We?" "Well," Thomas smiled, "someone needs to help me figure out these new abilities. Besides, Earth could use a guardian with your experience. And I could use a partner who understands both the stars and the soil." The last light of day painted the sky in colors that reminded Thomas of Nyara's eyes. Below them, the town was beginning to recover, its people emerging to rebuild. They would have questions, of course, about the lights in the sky and the strange events in the forest. Those questions would lead to changes, to new understandings about Earth's place in the galaxy. But that was tomorrow's concern. For now, two guardians stood watching the stars emerge, their hands still clasped, their energies still merged. They had found something neither expected, a way to protect not just a world or a galaxy, but the delicate connection between them. The mountain stood silent beneath them, its ancient power now awake and aware. In its depths, crystals pulsed with new energy, marking the beginning of a new era. Earth had revealed its strength, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.